Okay, welcome again. My name is Katie Collins. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior program manager with the Community Health Training Institute and with Health Resources in Action. Thank you all so much for being here today again. And our training today is website pitfalls, what not to do and how to do it right. This free training is offered through the Community Health Training Institute and is funded by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and is brought to you in partnership between DPH and Health Resources in Action. We're really excited for the content prepared today by Chris White and Hikari Mamata, both from Health Resources in Action, both of our colleagues. And today they're going to talk us through strategies for managing and sharing web content, how to define your own website goals. We're going to talk about accessibility, optimization, and so much more. I'm very excited to get a deep dive on this, as I also have a website for a youth program that I run and could use some tips. So I hope you're all excited to learn, to ask questions, and there'll be a couple opportunities to really dig into some of the content that you all are working on and questions that you might have for these experts that we have with us today. If you've been with us before, you know that we have a feedback survey that will be shared at the end of the training. We'd be oh so grateful if you could take 3 to 5 minutes to fill it out. It really helps us continue to improve on the trainings, offer content that you're all interested in, and continue, bringing you trainings that are relevant. So thanks in advance for helping with that feedback. And lastly, from me, we do have a live captioner with us. So if you'd like to see the captions, make sure to click on the show captions button in the right-hand corner of your screen. If you don't see that button, click on the ... more button to add it to your toolbar. If you have any tech questions, message me or Victoria and we can try and help. Without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Chris and Hikari to get it started.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. I am Hikari Mamata. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Associate Director of Helpline Technology here at HRIA. So good to be here with everybody here. If we could go to the next slide, I think we can just jump right in. All right. Yeah, this slide is good. Thank you. So before we, start talking really nitty gritty about the meaningful and effective websites, I want to briefly talk about why we do websites in the first place, where is a good place to start building, and things like that. So just starting at websites, they're not just digital flyers meant to be read from top to bottom, right? It's a powerful business tool. It acts as a central hub for your organization's digital presence. Your website is often the first meaningful interaction that your audience has with your organization. And it's the primary place where trust is built, questions are answered, and actions are taken. So it's a place that makes a first impression for your audience, right? So a well-structured website can establish credibility by having clear, up-to-date, and consistent information. You'd think it goes without saying, but having working links, intuitive navigation, and easily digestible content goes a long way in building confidence in that way. If you think of these small things as kind of like the bass in a band, right? You don't notice it if it's good, but when the bass isn't there, you notice right away and something's off, it's not interesting, things like that. So it's similar. You want to keep an eye on those details. Strategically, websites can support a lot of different functions from marketing, communications, customer service, recruitment, and sales all at once. And so it's a great place to guide users towards specific goals, like signing up for a newsletter or downloading a resource or making a phone call, things like that. And then from a measurement perspective, websites can provide valuable data through analytic tools, which can give you insights into user behavior, what content's performing well, and potential areas for improvement. So for all these benefits, it's really important that you treat your website as a living, breathing, evolving tool, and instead of it being just a one-time project that you do and then kind of leave it alone. So anything, if there's anything to take away from this slide, it's make sure that you keep updating, improving, iterating on the website that you make to make sure that you have credibility and engagement. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So where's a good place to start for websites? A good place is content management systems. So CMSs are software that helps users create, edit, and manage website content without really needing to code. There's a lot of them out there like WordPress, Squarespace, or Drupal. Each of them has its own interface, has its own set of capabilities, but at the core of it, the purpose is the same. They all separate out content from code. So even non-developers are able to create and maintain websites efficiently using these. So to use WordPress specifically as an example, users work in pages and posts, building pages through block-based editors to structure content, and then using themes on top of that for visual design. You can further extend the capabilities of CMS using plugins like adding search engine optimization tools or SEO, forms, analytics, translation, and accessibility enhancements. And I think Chris will go over some of that later on. Another beautiful thing about CMS is just that because it doesn't require deep technical knowledge to build pages and websites, it really empowers your team to collaborate more efficiently in building those sites. So multiple people can be building pages at the same time to kind of put together a website efficiently. As part of that, while you're collaborating, you can create roles with specific permissions for roles like authors, editors, administrators. So in that way, you can control how content flows from draft to review phase to publication, all just within that CMS. And this will help create that repeatable, streamlined process that will reduce errors and ultimately improve quality of your website as a whole. So one example I'll give is mass.gov. That site runs most of their web properties and for the entire state. And then it's built on top of Drupal, that CMS. So what that allows them to do is it allows content editors from different departments and offices to build pages without the need of a web developer in each of those offices. So they're able to collaborate on that, all while maintaining that cohesive experience throughout the website. So all that said, it's an important piece to understand that CMS is powerful, but it's also only a tool. So it doesn't automatically guarantee effective content or a good user experience. So ultimately, mastering that CMS means deeply understanding how to use its features intentionally and how you can use them to achieve content strategy, accessibility, and user goals rather than just going in and filling templates with a bunch of text. So let's get into the next slide, and we'll talk about kind of some of those strategies. So before we get into the content of this section, I did want to ask a question, and if you could put your responses in the chat with 1 to 2 sentences. My question is, if you're planning or just starting out a website project, I want to know what you're hoping your website accomplishes. And if you're not in that stage, if you have a website in mind that your team is maintaining or has worked on, what gave that team the idea for the website? What did they want to do with it? So I'll give everybody a moment.
Just to kind of help everyone, some information. Really good to know we're getting some comments through here. I was going to say some of those things could be like marketing, getting some communications out there, getting people to sign up for events. Really,
come through. Yeah. Providing health information, snapshot of info about services, ease of navigating, communication clarity. Yeah. Being a resource point for clients and community partners, accepting donations. Yeah, all really good stuff. Trusted place for public health resources, answer questions people have. Yeah, these are great. So keep putting them in the chat. And later on, I hope to kind of connect on seeing how you guys are achieving that through the website. So keep throwing them in the chat. We'll move on. Next slide, please. Oh, we might have skipped. Yeah, thank you. Awesome. So what we're really talking about with that question, right, is we're talking about goals for your website. But just to take a brief step back, your organization, program, or project that this website is for has an overarching goal. And that's your guiding North Star. This North Star should articulate what that program, organization, project, what it exists to do for its users, customers, or audience. So every decision along the way should be made in service of that goal, that guiding North Star. And then within that decision making, at some point, someone had the idea to create a website. There was an initial spark, right? That said, this is an opportunity, this is a gap that we want to fill. So effective websites begin with these two pieces, the North Star and an initial spark. And that gives a clear sense of purpose that can guide decision making along the way, really all the way until eventually when the website might be sunset. So those decisions could look like, there's this new piece of content that we want to create a page for. Well, does it fulfill the goal within that initial spark, the reason you said you wanted a website, what you wanted the website to do? Is it still serving that guiding North Star, the goal of your overarching program? So those are two things that you kind of want to consistently go back to with every decision that comes along the way. To provide a more concrete example, I work on the Massachusetts Substance Use Helpline and maintain that website. And the guiding North Star for that program as a whole is to provide free, confidential, compassionate referrals that connect folks to the right harm reduction, treatment, and recovery services for substance use and problem gambling and other behavioral issues, right? So really, at the core, the North Star, we want to connect folks to the right services. And that program has a lot of different pieces. We have the contact center that fields the calls or text or chats from customers to provide referrals. We have an outreach and champions team that are physically in the communities, connecting with people and connecting them to services. We have a clearinghouse team that provides physical materials to people like Narcan or rescue breathing masks and things like that. And then we have the website. So we're just one tool among all these elements that are all pointing in the same direction to that North Star in service of connecting people to resources. So for that website, that initial spark that triggered the need for the website is to create a self-service digital hub that has resources for people at any part of their behavior change journey that includes ways to connect directly to our contact center as well. So with call, text, and chat. So initial spark being a self-service digital hub. So once you define that initial spark, put it in a statement, save it. Ted Lasso has that believe sign at the top of the door. You always want to refer back to it. So have something like that as an initial spark statement. Then the next step is really identifying key audiences. So most websites will have multiple groups like customers, partners, job seekers, or internal stakeholders. And each audience will come with their own needs, expectations, and motivations, right? So this is a great time to create user personas. And user personas are first-person narratives that you write for each audience group that really describes what's bringing them to your site, what information are they wanting to find when they get there, and what actions do they want to take, or are they going to want to take on your website? So rather than trying to serve everyone with the same content, effective sites will define 3 to 4 primary audiences and then create specific goals for each of them. So assuming you've effectively defined your initial Spark statement, that's a great time to revisit it, right? It's identifying who are the audiences that your website should be speaking to as part of this grand goal of this North Star. So these audience goals, specific audience goals should be measurable and actionable. So examples of that would be like increasing clicks on your calls to action, or improving time spent on resource pages, or even reducing bounce rates, making sure that people are getting there and getting what they need instead of getting there and then moving straight on. So again, kind of going back to my example of the substance use helpline from Massachusetts, our audience for that website is the people in different stages of behavior change. So people that are looking for harm reduction resources, they may be in the contemplation stage where they know there's a problem, but they're not quite ready for treatment services. So harm reduction page might be the right place for them. We also have a treatment page for those that are specifically seeking treatment services. Maybe they want to explore other treatment services that they're not engaged in yet. And then another page for recovery. So people that are in recovery and want resources to support that.
What are you studying? Psychology.
In terms of audience goals, I'll use harm reduction as the example, but in that audience, we're tracking engagement through time spent on that page, clicks to links, clicks on links to resources to harm reduction, orders for harm reduction materials, and then clicks to calls, texts, and chats through that page. So it's some of the ways to measure that we're doing what we want them to do there. And then in addition to tracking whether we're achieving what we want them to do, audience-specific goals will also help the project team prioritize like what content they should be creating next, what content to update and how often, what to remove because it's no longer serving your audiences, things like that. So these goals ultimately provide clarity when making trade-offs, like deciding which pages should be more prominent on a website, for example. If you have a navigation, should it be the first option, second option, things like that. So having these goals is really important to kind of guide that decision-making. So once you're able to align that initial spark for the website with a clearly defined list of goals for your audiences, then you're really able to create that strong strategic foundation that makes sure your content remains focused, relevant, and purposeful over time. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so now let's talk about how we should structure that content. An impactful website content is going to be built around user needs rather than your own assumptions of how things should be structured, right? So when you're going back and building those user personas of your audience and what they're looking for, it might be helpful to, if you have the time and budget, of course, but it might be helpful to conduct those in-depth interviews with those target audiences and hear what they expect to see when they're on a website and what they expect to do on that website, right? Or what they want to be able to do. Then structurally, visitors will, once they get on the website, scan. That's all they do, at least initially. They're going to scan quickly. So the first thing they're looking for is just, am I in the right place? And then they want to see, well, does it feel like this place is going to get my question answered quickly? So this makes structure really important and just as important as how you word your content. And in some ways, it's more important because it makes that first impression and could prevent or cause a person to bounce. So effective content we'll use clear headings, descriptive subheadings, short paragraphs, and a logical sequencing to guide users through the information that you're offering. So for an example, another helpline that I work on in Vermont, the Vermont Substance Use Helpline is called the Vermont Help Link. And we have a treatment page. And when you visit the treatment page, the very first word you see, treatment, you know you're in the right place, right? Right below it, calls to action, call, text, chat. We're telling them exactly how they can engage with us when you're looking for treatment. And then the rest of the content is organized in subheadings, organized by what is treatment, what services are out there in terms of treatment, and then what can you expect when you decide to engage with treatment. So kind of guiding them through that process. Visual hierarchy is also important. So we're talking about structure, where things are. Visually, you can impact it through spacing and font size, layout. And a lot of that can be defined at the theme level. So we talked about CMS having themes that apply that visual design to your website. So using themes to define that helps, especially when you're building multiple pages, those kind of visual indicators of heading size and font is consistent page to page. So you're kind of priming your audience. Once they've visited one page, they know what to expect to the next page and the next and the next. So you're kind of also creating that expectation for them and creating that ease of navigation. And again, it's always nice to set that expectation, because our tendency when we visit a website is to skim. We just want to look at the big headings, find what we're looking for, and then we'll drill in right into the details. So super important. So consistently evaluate your content, especially through the lens of your users, and importantly, against your initial Spark statement. Make sure that you're still doing what you said you wanted to do with that website. And by doing that, you'll be able to make pages that are much easier to understand, more engaging, more effective at driving the outcomes that you defined for those audiences. And it's also more likely that you'll bring users back, right? Returning users are a great metric to keep track of. All right, next slide. Oh, we have a hand.
Yeah, could I ask a quick question, Kari?
Yeah.
I love the idea of doing these interviews with folks who you would expect to come visit your website. Could you talk to us a little bit about like what types of questions you would typically ask somebody in those interviews, and how you would really like suss out what matters to them in regards to their interactions with the website? And I'm also seeing another question here from Emily of, do you have examples of websites that use guidelines, that use these guidelines, and less impactful websites that don't? Like maybe an example of a good website that really does this well, and a website that's doing it a little less well.
Good questions. And I might lean on Chris for any examples as well. But for your first question about in-depth interviews, it depends on what stage you are with your website, right? Like if you're starting fresh with, you don't have a website, but you know this is a good idea and you want to get a sense of your audiences and what they want. That's a great place to be, because once you have a website, it's hard to kind of restructure without starting from scratch. So when you have a brand new website, really engage with your audiences, ask questions like, what is the information that you're trying to seek? Understand who they are within that context, right? And what they're looking to learn, what they're looking to do. Once you visit, you do hypotheticals. Once you visit the website, what content do you want to be able to find there? What are the questions you're trying to answer? Would it be helpful to speak to someone instead of sifting through content? Would it be helpful to have a form for other inquiries that might not be answered? Things like that. Those might be a little more guiding than I would normally do, but like those are also helpful just to get a sense of like, you have an idea for a website that solves a problem that you're seeing, and kind of doing that gut check with real users that might be engaging. And then once you do have a website and you want to evaluate it, a great way to do it is having a screen share and prompt them. You're looking for resources on harm reduction, just show me how you would find that. And you'd be able to track their clicks, their kind of thought process, looking through the screen, scanning, trying to find it. And then after you would ask, like, how was your experience looking for it? Did you get what information you needed? And that provides a lot of great data later on, how many clicks did it take? How long did it take? Where on the page was it that they were looking for? Things like that.
Awesome. Thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah. Chris, examples?
Sure. So I think that there are a couple of really good examples out there, and you see them across the board. One of the big sites that we constantly turn to, it is visually really boring, and I'm really sorry. We really like UK, was it gov.uk, which is the UK government's website. They built all of the information to be as accessible, as easy to find. What you need to do is really straightforward. It lays out your primary items that you want right off the bat. I would throw a pretty obvious one out there. I think are another really great example if you want less content, really visually engaging, is Apple. Let's be honest, they spend a lot of money on their website and they do a really good job. But when you go there, if you know, I think the big things that you notice is there's really not that much text on the page. It's really visually engaging. The latest thing they've just released is the top of the page. How you get that item is right there. There's clear buttons, there's clear navigation. Even though they have a lot of things going on, it is really simple to move through that site. I'm struggling weirdly to find it like bad examples, but I think we all know them. They're typically the website that, someone threw together and what, they wanted to communicate was everything. So when you first land there, it is a wall of text that is 4 paragraphs about the person. It is 15 paragraphs about the services that they offer. The navigation isn't particularly well structured. It's really hard to find things. And after about, the 5 seconds, you're like, I do not care what you are selling at this point. I am moving on to something different. And those are what you should be looking at with your website. If you want 5 seconds to look at it, are you still going to be engaged after 5 seconds? Because honestly, that is the average benchmark for people on a page. 5 seconds. But I'll let you keep going, Hikari.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the questions.
Of course.
So yeah, well, I mean, that's a great segue into the next piece, which is about writing the content itself. So in terms of best practices for content, when we're talking about web content, it's really different from print or long form writing, because like Chris said, people are going to skim. People are going to take 5 seconds and decide this is the place I want to be or this is not. Right. So even if people decide that is where they want to be, it's very rare for them to read word for word every single information that's there. So again, that makes structure, clarity, brevity super important in kind of thinking about how you want to develop your content. So in general, for writing, you want to write in plain language. So you want to avoid jargon that might kind of confuse users or visitors. If you do use jargon because it's relevant to the content, explain it so that you're making it accessible to multiple audiences there. Use active voice so that you're making sure you're connecting with your user. And then, active voice to prompt action as well. And then break content into digestible pieces. Instead of having a wall of text, break it up, put it in accordions, make bullets, things like that, so that it's much easier to skim, easier to grasp the content you need. Let's see. Consistent tone and style. That is also super important in order to really build trust and reinforce the brand identity, right? Especially if you have a large site with multiple contributors adding content to your website, you want to make sure you have at least someone editing the content, reviewing it to make sure that you're keeping the same messaging, you're not providing conflicting information, you're speaking about things in the same way so that you're all coming from one voice. Again, that kind of comes back to credibility and trust in the content that you're offering. Accessibility should also be considered as part of the good writing practice. We talked about plain language. Acronyms is another one that you want to make sure you spell out before you provide it to make sure that people are understanding what you're saying, and then ensuring links are descriptive rather than just saying click here. You can say like click here to learn more about X or click here to download Y. You want to be descriptive to make sure that people know what they're taking action on. Let's see. Another piece is proactive user engagement. So it can be effective to, going back to your user personas, anticipate what your audience is going to want to learn and address those proactively in your content. So I'll put a plug in here also just to make sure that, or make note that editing and reviewing content before publication is always in your practice. Even the smallest error, people will catch it, we'll see it, and we'll be like, oh, well, this wasn't really looked at carefully. Maybe they're not very serious or whatever it may be. So those are small issues that easy to correct. So just make sure you're reviewing before you're publishing. Not to mention, it'll improve usability, comprehension, and just overall quality, as well as the user's experience while they're there. All right. Next slide, please. Thank you. Awesome. So once you publish your content, you're not done, right? That's not it. You don't just say, all right, that's it. I'm gonna leave this up. After that, you just created such a powerful tool that's in service to that guiding North Star, right? So you want to put it into action. Publishing is the first step, and then making sure that you're distributing effectively, make sure that it reaches the audiences that you want it to reach, and that it fulfills that initial spark that you had to bring this website to life. You can support your website through different modes of communication, like email newsletters, social media, internal communications, like feedback forms, a lot of ways to do it. And repurposing the content that you have on your website is a great way to do that. Not only does it maximize the value of the content you already developed, but it also creates this consistency in tone and messaging and can serve as kind of a bridge for users, right? To see the messaging, see the tone, see the information you're providing. Once they get to the website, they see that similar messaging, similar tone, similar information. So you're kind of creating that familiarity already, even before they've landed on your site. And then as your website matures and you develop more content, add more ideas for how to engage users, it's also important to look out for the common pitfalls that can undermine that effectiveness. So one of them is natural growth of the website without cleaning or auditing your website frequently. So that includes, having overcrowded pages with a bunch of information that you kept adding because you thought it would be helpful. That can overwhelm users. Large websites with many, many internal pages, making it hard to find things eventually. What we call rot content, things that are redundant, outdated, or time sensitive that should all be removed when it's no longer relevant. And then excessive plugins, so things like translation, SEO, there are really helpful plugins, but if you have a lot of them, it can slow performance of your website, and that'll impact who's able to reach it and their experience using your website. Another pitfall, veering away from your initial spark. I've said this many times already, but always revisit your initial spark. When you have new content page you want to add, have in the back of your mind, does this fulfill that initial reason we started this website? And is it in service of that North Star for this entire program? It might be, but it's always good to check. And lastly, neglecting mobile users is another pitfall. When we talk about websites, the first thing we usually think about is desktop, but a lot of people are using mobile devices, tablets to access our websites. So really can't neglect that aspect of it. Make sure we're using responsive design, and anytime we're publishing content, test on your phone. Just look it up on your phone, make sure that everything looks right and everything is formatting and you're able to see all the content. Again, small pieces, but goes a long way. I think that is my portion, and I'll hand it to you, Chris. And if there's other questions that have come up, I'm happy to field that.
Yeah. Hey everyone. I realize I've spoken a couple of times, but hi, I'm Chris White. I use the he series pronouns. I'm the managing director of technology at HRIA. I oversee like our entire web team, where we build out a lot of these sites. We've seen a lot of these pitfalls. We've seen a lot of these challenges, and we really want to bring some of that knowledge to you. And so I get the really fun part, if we go to the next slide, of a really big question that we had was accessibility, and also optimization. And then, of course, we always have to talk about the boring stuff that needs to go on your site, but everyone forgets about that you really need to do. But before I jump into that, I just want to ask another question just to kind of get some spark and some conversation started. What does accessibility mean to you? A lot of people asked about it. Title II is around the corner. So if you go ahead, much like we did before, throw into the chat, what does accessibility mean to you? Why do we do it? Why is it important? Or what challenges are you having with it? I'm here for anything. So got a nice few initial ones, ease of access, because it feels nice to be included. I think we all want that, right? It makes things open, makes the whole website open to everyone. Some challenges, it can make a website boring. You want to quickly be able to find some information, readability, fair and equal opportunities, equity, make it easy to read. So it sounds like we got some common themes coming here. It's really about opening up websites to everyone. It's really about making it easy, and where you can make some of those enhancements that actually benefit you more than you would think as you start building this out. So why don't we go ahead and we'll jump to the next slide. So one of the big things that if you're looking at building a website, or you have a website in progress at this time, you should make a core principle and a core decision to include accessibility as part of the foundation. And that really does ensure that your website is able to work for everyone. And that's really what you want. And so really when you start looking at the benefits, it is strangely going to move over to my next slide about search engine optimization, SEO. It also is going to help you write some of your language. Because really what you want to do is make sure that your website works across all devices, it works across assistive technology. Your website is written in really plain language. I think to continue hammering on what Hikari said in the last few slides, I really try and get my team to work in, for a lot of this stuff, explain it like I'm 5. Can you get content that anyone can read? The 5-year-old can read it, the 10-year-old can read it, because it will actually make your language really crisp, clear, and concise by using that principle. But let's go into the true nitty-gritty of accessibility. What I am going to say is I'm not going to go through the Title II, which is the WCAG 2.1 AA rating. If you really want to go look them up, there's 175 various requirements you need to meet for them. But let's talk about some of the big things that you need to include in that. And it goes back to what Hikari said. It is about proper heading structure. Does your content is it logically broken down using what are called headings? If you're looking at them, they're usually structured from what's called H1 to H5. I've occasionally seen H6. But the way that they work is every page should have one H1. Below that, or slightly further down, you may have what's called an H2, which is your next bit of content. It's your next subheading with your next big chunk of information. A good way to think about this is if you were to take a page, and let me just go into how a screen reader works. It basically, you kind of tab through different sections and it's looking for the heading. So we'll read off the main title and then it will start going through the subheadings and then you can click into that content. So if you were to imagine your site and you close your eyes and you were to try and navigate through your site, you go to the first heading, it gives you a title. It could be something as simple as About Us. And then you go to the next section and you've created as an H2. Maybe you want to talk about finances or our mission. Does that represent when you tab down to H2? Will you understand that if you're not looking at the rest of the content? Will you want to click into that? And so that's how a lot of people, when they start thinking about heading structures, will look through it. If I was not to look at the rest of the content, would I understand those sections from those headings? The other thing to keep in mind with headings, they are not styles. They are structurally important to be able to convey information out. And so really you'll just kind of you kind of nest them and then you come back up to the top. So, you start at H1 in your main page style, you should only have one. And then maybe you have a couple of H2s. And then below H2s, you have H3s, and below H3s, you have H4s. And they should all go in order and then kind of go back to the beginning. You shouldn't jump headings, so it shouldn't go like H2 and then an H4. It should go in as the importance of your content. The other big thing is, let's talk about images. So a lot of pages have images. They also have graphs. They have charts. If you're blind or you have some other disability, how are you going to be able to read those? How are you going to be able to convey that information? What I try and say is you should balance between text and images. Images are really important if you can see them or understand what's on them. And so what I see a lot for, there are alternative text for images. I call them alt text. You'll see that throughout different checkers and accessibility. But let's look at the slide I have in front of me. There's a nice picture on a website. And what I quite often see for alt text is it will be woman sat in chair. What if you've never seen that image, what does that mean to you? But a good example of building an alt text could be, it's a woman with a maroon sweater sat in a brown chair working on a laptop. That gives you descriptive idea of what's happening. The same goes for if you have charts and graphs. You want to be able to convey the information that's in those charts and graphs. Now, there are ways to make charts and graphs accessible. It gets tricky, and I don't have time to go over this. But those are really, really important to ensure that people understand what's happening on your page. And then the last thing that's really important is your color contrast. A way to think about this is there is a good percentage of people who suffer of some type of a color blindness. And so it could range, like maybe they don't see one spectrum of light, maybe they only see things in gray. But let's take it, if you can only see it in gray, and you've picked out these great colors, they're really fun, they're flashy. But what happens if you turn them to a grayscale? Do they all blend together at that point? So have you created enough of a contrast between the background color and the text color that you have? There are checkers online that you can use. WebAIM is one of them. You can actually punch in either the hex code or the RGB color that will run, say like this is this font color and this is the background color, and I'll either tell you yes, it's accessible or no, it's not. At which point you'll have to go back and reconfigure those colors. I will say for some people, this is where they think things get a little boring. I don't think it does. I think you can make some really interesting color palettes between like really dark colors and really light colors. You can have pops of colors, but maybe those bold, I would say like the big ones I see that really struggle with it are like lime greens, pinks, light blues. You really struggle to get them to fit nicely on a background color. But maybe use those in another interesting way. Maybe they're a decorative touch to it. And so those are ways that you can incorporate it. But really, when you're looking at a site, it should have, proper heading structure, alt text for items that are not text. And then you should make sure that you have sufficient color contrast. But let's talk about how you navigate through the site, because I think this is where, people fail to realize this. How many of you broken an arm, a finger, a wrist, some other limb where you can't necessarily use your mouse so well? For me, if I broke my right wrist or my right arm, I'm going to do the weird shuffle with my mouse, but it's not going to work too well. And so one of the things you have to make sure that works for your site is, can you get it to work with your keyboard? You should be able to tab through all of your site. You should be able to get forms to work by just tabbing. How many of you have tabbed on a form that someone built and you start with name and then the next thing you know, it goes somewhere like halfway down the page to like the phone number, and then you bounce back up to put in your last name and you're like, what is happening on this form? They should work sequentially. And you really need to ensure that you're testing those things to ensure that they work. Because even for me, I'm a completely functional user. I would be so annoyed by the fact that I can't just tab through a form, especially if I'm trying to purchase something where, I'm bouncing around a page just to try and buy one thing. But let's go into a little bit further for this. We've talked a lot about content, the way it's structured, how it needs to be usable, and you really should be thinking about this in plain language. Really bring this up because that will help you with your search engine optimization. But really, when you start thinking of like your content and some of your other pieces, you're gonna start running into what are the legal considerations for accessibility. Now, for any of you who are here from either state, local, or other government entities, congratulations, you have 11 days to meet these standards because Title II is around the corner. It comes into effect on 4/26. If you're a small government, less than 50,000 people in your constituency, I guess you have another year to do this. If you're from a nonprofit or for-profit or from some other group, there are still legal considerations for this. One of the big things that has come out with ADA is that websites are public domain, and you need to ensure that they are accessible. Sadly, there's a whole cadre of ambulance chasers, lawyers, instead of chasing ambulances, are now suing websites and small businesses for accessibility. And you would think that that won't affect nonprofits or you're a single solo practitioner. Unfortunately, you're probably the easiest target because you probably don't have the legal representation. You're just going to cough up $1,000 to just make them go away. But you can head this off by ensuring that your website does meet these accessibility standards. And there are ways to check this. You can do this either by hiring a consultant that can do this. You could use a tool like WebAIM. There's a couple other online tools. Even Google's Lighthouse will run through and do the checks for you. Now, a lot of these things you will still need to do yourself. One of the things it does weirdly struggle with is color contrast. So sometimes you need to manually check those things. You need to check headings. You need to check you can tab through a site. You should do some of this checking yourself. But that's what we got for accessibility. What I will do at the end of this is we are going to have some breakout rooms. I can talk more about accessibility if you've got some nitty-gritty questions. I could probably do an entire 2-hour presentation on accessibility because there's a lot to it, but I'm going to just give you this brief overview. And then I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. But let's keep going. I talked that, there's accessibility optimization and some boring stuff. Let's talk about the optimization. And these are strangely related to accessibility. So when we go into this, how many of you've noticed that Google now is giving you a summary at the top of the page? It's just a quick description. What Google's doing at this point is using the top 10 pages to draft that content. So if your website isn't in the top 10, you may not be seen. And I love to use this example for people why search engine optimization is really important. I'm probably also going to date myself that I'm approaching 40 for some of you, but I love to use the example of the Field of Dreams. Your website, sadly, is not the Field of Dreams. Just because you build it, they will not come. You have to kind of get people to come to your site. And one of those ways is to ensure that you are correctly building it for search engine optimization. And a way to do that is you really start with what are your intentional keywords, phrases, ideas that you want to show up for in Google. So a lot of times it could just be your organization's name. I work for Health Resources in Action. We want to ensure that Health Resources in Action is #1 thing you see on Google, right? And so we make sure that we are checking those keywords, that they are working, that we're near the top. But we also do, CHAs and CHIPs, the community health assessments, community health improvement plans. And so how do we ensure that we are in Massachusetts, New England, the United States, showing up inside of those? So we actually check those keywords. We kind of punch them in. And then we start looking at the pages that may be reflected in those. Do we talk about, CHAs and CHIPs? How do we bring those forward? And a way to do that is looking at your on-page optimization. So one of the big things that you will need is a page title. This is different than the H1 I talked about in the last section. This is in the code. You will need to ensure that you have an actual page title. If you're using something like a CMS, that's whatever you have called the page. It typically will do like your H1 and your page title. Then you also should look at something that's a meta description. It's a 2 to 3 sentence thing that you write about the content that's on that page. And then you know what it really uses when it crawls your site, which is the technical terminology for how Google finds all your pages, kind of puts your content. It uses those headings. So if you don't work on the structure of your site from accessibility standpoints, Google, Bing, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Copilot will not be able to really understand your site because there's no heading, no structures to it. And it goes the same thing with the images, right? Sure, AI can now look at an image and kind of figure out what it is, but Google's not going to do that. It's going to be relying a lot on those alt texts to kind of tell it what it is doing. And that's also where some of the content clarity comes in. Having simplified language that clearly explains the concept or the idea that you want on the page will help you show up better in Google. There was an old school thing that the way to show up in Google was just to talk about the item like repeatedly. Google actually banned you from Google for doing that. Because that's what's called keyword stuffing. And it was like, way back in the day when this was a thing, that's what people used to do. If you just talked about the item repeatedly or just put it like hidden, that was the way to get to the top of the list. It doesn't work that way anymore. It's really starting to figure out what the context of your page is. How do you get the ideas to sit on the top? How are you structuring content for those keywords to show up in Google, which helps you with your accessibility? Then you should have internal links. And a lot of this goes to what Hikari talked about at the beginning. You need to have good site structure, good site navigation. What is the navigation you have on your site? Is it simple? Is it going to direct people to where they need to be? Have you built inside of the pages? If you have content talking on another page, do you have links to that page? One of the ways the crawlers work is it actually just keeps following links. That's the really funny part about this is that's how it kind of finds websites and pages, is that it just keeps following links and then just keeps kind of like finding information and adding to its index. But you need to have a way for it to kind of move through your site, find all of those pages. And then there is a performance aspect to this. If your site, if you have all these things that Hikari warned you about, if you have a lot of plugins to bring content and you have unoptimized images and things aren't optimized for mobile, and your page loads really slowly, you get penalized by Google at this point. If your website isn't mobile friendly in some way, you will actually not show up at all anymore. It's a really big thing that you need to keep in mind. How well does your site show up on mobile? How fast does that page load? Are you doing things to kind of optimize it? And some of the tools, if you're using WordPress or Drupal, and I know it's built into Squarespace, I think Wix as well. For WordPress and Drupal, you'll need to add a plugin. We use Yoast. I'm not selling Yoast. I'm not bringing anything. It's just the one that we use. But that will set up additional fields on the page to add, the page title, what language is it in, what's the meta description, what are the keywords that you want this to be? And that will all help you kind of show up better inside of Google. And a lot of this stuff is really going to help you, especially as search engines are changing, the way people are finding information. We're moving away from people doing Google searches now. A lot of people are starting to use ChatGPT. They're using Copilot. They're using, the built-in Gemini into Google. And so it's becoming even more important for SEO to ensure that your content is new, relevant, what you have on the page and how you want to show up is there. Because if you're talking that Google's only now going to use the first 10 pages in order to produce a summary, Copilot's going to do the same thing. ChatGPT is going to do the same thing. Claude's doing the same thing. And so if you want to get out front and center, you need to ensure that your content is relevant to those keywords. How are you wanting people to find you? What are those keywords? But enough about SEO. I'm going to bore you some more. If we go to the next slide, Victoria. Let's talk about some truly boring stuff that your site needs. These are a lot of things that protect you. And it really starts with the most mundane, boring part that I can give about a website. Those are the legal documents that you need. At a very basic sense, your site should all have a privacy policy and a terms of use. They dictate how you are capturing people's information, how you are using that information. How do you want people to use the site? Some people also put accessibility statements on there, especially if you are meeting new standards. It's also a way to say, like, if you do have content that is not accessible, like you have PDFs, you really can put a little bit of a cover out there for yourself by saying, hey, we're doing our best to make these things accessible, but they may not be at this point, but we're working to remediate them. But really, what I have to tell everyone when you're writing these things, even though you can go have ChatGPT, Copilot, you can also go online and find examples of privacy policy and terms of use. Make sure that you are carefully reading those documents. See what it says about what you are doing with the information. Are you using cookies on your site? Let me make this really clear. If your site says in your privacy policy that you don't use cookies, but you have Google Analytics, you are not meeting those needs. You are basically not correctly positioning your site. And this really comes down to if you get sued or something happens, these are the things that the lawyers love to read. If you said A and you did B, who's at fault in that? So you really should be looking at that. I would probably say if you've got a little bit of money, maybe have your lawyers, especially if you're capturing information. If you're capturing, names, addresses, email addresses, I would go further. If you're getting credit cards, even if you're using a third-party provider, and you're capturing even more sensitive information than that, I would really carefully have a lawyer review those and make sure that you are covering yourself across all of those statements. But then let's go into, something fun that everyone also forgets, security. Your site should have some, if you're using a WordPress, make sure that you're using a firewall. This could be like a security plugin or use something like Cloudflare. I think the other thing that you really should be doing at this point is instilling secure passwords and multi-factor authentication. MFA, multi-factor authentication, is where like you get a text message or you have another code that pops up if you use like an authenticator, either Google, Microsoft, 1Password, one of those. And the reason is the number one way sites get hacked, the number one way like you lose your email accounts, organizations lose their stuff, is through either phishing, or for a lot of sites, it's because you reuse the same password. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because I don't want you all to admit this, but how many of you are reusing the same username and password and you don't have an MFA on your site? All it takes is someone to go look through it's a site called iPond. It basically lists all of the times and all of the usernames and passwords they've collected through various different data breaches. And if it shows up there, let's be honest, they have access to your site at that point. You should add different ways to get into the site. And you could do that through limiting login attempts. So give people 5 opportunities to put in the right username and password and then lock their account for 5 minutes. The other thing you should be doing is removing old users. See it all the time when we look at sites is, a staff member left 10 years ago and somehow they are still on the website. They're still an admin. They still have permissions to everything. Take away either their permission or delete their account. Make sure that you're not opening up that for other people. The other thing you should be doing, running updates on your site, especially if you have a WordPress or a Drupal, make sure that you're running the core updates, make sure you're running plugin updates, just really ensuring that the website's secure. A lot of the updates you'll see are not new features, they are really to fix bugs. And I will say it's becoming more prevalent that they're finding more and more bugs, and some of the bugs are allowing people just to create stuff on your site, which is a real issue. The other thing I would say is if you are using open source like WordPress, Drupal, make sure you're using the official plugin module directories because those have been vetted. I would be really cautious about just grabbing something off something like Stack Overflow or from the internet that's like, hey, this will address all your problems. Do you really know what it's doing? A lot of nefarious people are out there that will try and get into your site. The other thing is, if you are running a site, if it's just you, you can probably tune out, go get some water for a quick second. But if you do have multiple users who are accessing your site, and I would definitely say if you are above 5 users, work on the concept of least privilege. The amount of sites that I see where everyone is an admin. For some reason, they needed this one feature, and so everyone became an admin on the site. But that also means everyone has access to do everything. And so you should be really thinking about what do people need to do on your site? What are those users that you're working with? What do they need to do on the site? And what level of permission do they need to have? And then last thing for this, hosting and domain names. Make sure you're using a memorable domain name. I can't tell you how many super long domain names I've seen that at like 30 seconds after you told me I've forgotten about. This is a time like if you have acronyms, you can use them. Something that just really kind of sparks people to remember your site. The other thing is, it's really funny I say that, but also a lot of ways people get to them is either through Google or, shared links. And then finally, if you're hosting your own site, make sure that you're using a reputable and reliable host. Make sure you're not spending like $3 a month on like a WordPress hosting, because it usually means it's going to be kind of slow. It's not going to have the features. There's not going to be security built into it. So just make sure that you're really getting a host or an environment that's really going to help you. It's going to be speedy. Your page is going to load well. You're not battling other people that might be on that server. And so with that, let's go to the next slide. I think it's the last section. So let's talk about ways that you can make this a little bit easier. So, I've talked a little bit about AI through here and tools that are out there. So let's go into the next slide. So how can you use AI to kind of make this easier for yourself? Some of the great ways you can use ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or Perplexity is you can really use this for brainstorming ideas. You can use this to draft outlines. You can use this to summarize your content for more diverse audiences. You can pretty much just plug in like, hey, can you help me write an article on X? And it will go out and try and generate you content on that. And this is really where it goes back to what Hikar talked about, content editing. Make sure that you're adding your own voice to it. Make sure that you're going back and editing it. I find nothing more boring than when I clearly know that you've used AI to write the entire page and it's starting to sound like every other web page out there. I don't want to read it. Make it your own, but you can definitely use AI to kind of generate some of the content. Do some brainstorming. Some ideas you can throw into it is, hey, I want to write 5 articles over the next 6 months. Can you brainstorm me ideas for, public health topics that would be relevant over the month of November? And then see what it pulls back. Refine the list, ask it a couple more questions, see if you can kind of tone it down. Another way that you can use AI for this is looking at your accessibility or optimization. You can start having AI look at your alt text. Can you have it check, an image, help you write and generate some of those ideas? You can also take your article and throw it into one of the AI agents and be like, what's the reading level? Is this, could a 10-year-old be able to understand this? What's the reading level? You can ask it to kind of streamline some of that content. You can ask it to, what are ways to simplify this content? What's more digestible? Can you summarize this and kind of refine it from there? It's one of the cool things with some of this technology is trying to massage the content to what you need. You can also have it then, if you really wanted to, like, hey, if you were to be a search engine and you're looking at this content, what are the keywords? What are the meta descriptions? And it can generate those. Or you can use it to spot check to see whether that content will show up in Google where you want it to be. But I have to put for being a high-level tech person, really loving all these tools, I have to tell everyone this. Please, please, please make sure that you review the content that AI generates, even if it's content you originally wrote. Make sure that you go back and check it. It is shocking how much stuff hallucinates and gives you information that isn't accurate. Or necessarily what you're trying to convey. It's best to kind of summarize what it's looking and pulling things together, but you really should be the final person. You are the owner of the website or the content. Does it meet the tone, the inclusivity? Is there something wrong with it? Is it aligning with your goals of the website? Finally, you can also use some of this for like workflow integrations. You don't necessarily have to use AI for this. You can use AI to like generate some of these stories. You can use it to, summarize some of the entries you get if you have a contact form. But you could also use integrations. I've not found a good reason or why anyone should still be manually downloading all of the people who signed up for their newsletter form and then importing into MailChimp. You should look at what connections you can make so that it automatically goes straight into those, into MailChimp or some of your other newsletter forms. And so there are ways to kind of speed things up so that you can do more, so you can generate more content. You can really ensure that your site is meeting all the needs and the goals of your program and the website.
Chris, could I pause you there? So like on that note, that's a really good tip of like seeing how you can make it way easier to not have to download, re-upload, stuff like that. Do you have other examples of where you would suggest to this group of people, like look into these other two options to make it like way easier on yourself so that you're not doing work that's actually unnecessary at this point with where the tech is at?
Sure. There's a lot of ways you can build some of these workflows and integrations. I recently just worked with a member of our team. They were collecting all this, they had a certification program. They were collecting this information. And what was happening was they needed to update a spreadsheet. And so what we worked with them was actually making a connection between the contact form to their database. And it saves them like 35 minutes a day by just making that simple connection. And it just pre-filled their spreadsheet in so that they could keep track of what they were doing. Another way that we have this, we built our ticketing system where there's automations built into it. So fill out a form, it goes right into our ticketing system. There's a lot of ways that if you have data that's collected, where do you want it to be? How do you make those connections to go out into a database, a CRM, some other tools that will make your life easier? I would take some time to kind of plan out, where are you spending a lot of time, manually moving stuff around? Where can you build tools to make your life easier?
To that point, I think when we do go into these breakout rooms, for all of our attendees, if you have examples that you'd be interested in talking through, bring those to the breakout rooms because these brains are great ones to pick when it comes to like, this is actually something I like wouldn't even know where to start with. And so like, how would I go about doing this?
I think we have one more slide, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and we have 15 minutes left. So
Great.
yeah.
I'm not going to take 15 minutes. We can go early into the breakout rooms. But let's just kind of go over the things that you should be remembering from your site. For your entire site, you should be remembering what that North Star is. It is really, we ask this question whenever we start working with different clients, whenever we start building things out. What is the guiding North Star for your site? What are the measurable goals you want to meet? How are you meeting those goals? And work off of those as the basis for your entire website. Really make that your front and center piece. Does your content, do the images, does the site itself help you achieve that North Star? Does it help those audience goals? And if it doesn't, do you need to write that article? Do you need to add that picture? Do you need that chart? Do you need to do that one piece of outreach? Just keep that in mind. Make that a really clear, centered approach to what you're trying to do. Then you really should be looking at writing user-centered content. Focus on accessible language, accessibility of the structure of the site, making sure that the content you're writing meets SEO. It's written in clear, plain language that creates a really good user experience for people and creates the outcomes that you want. And with that content that you've now written, you've created this lovely website, make sure that you're using this as a central hub, making sure that you're then distributing content through social media, through newsletters, through other sources that really help you achieve your goals. And then I have to leave everyone with this. Websites are living, breathing things that need to be cared and fed with different content, different ways to make improvements to it. They could be incremental. It could be, hey, look, I don't think the header looks that good anymore. Redesign the header, make something that looks nicer. I think one of the biggest things that we have seen when we start working with new clients is they have spent 3 years battling leadership to get a new website. But rather than taking time to keep their existing website going, they have given up on it. Now, what will happen with that is you're going to start losing any of the traction, your SEO, where you're going with it, because it is just slowly becoming more and more outdated because you're waiting for the shiny new object. Make sure that if you do get the shiny new object and you build it out, make sure that you are the one who keeps carrying and feeding it, making sure you're writing new content for it, new blog posts. You're checking your Google Analytics to ensure that the content that you have is meeting the needs. You're getting people who are actively engaged with the site. They're doing stuff on your website. They're spending a decent amount of time. They're not just hitting the homepage and bouncing off of it. If you're seeing bounce rates over 95% or even 90%, take a look at why that is. If they're only there for 2 seconds, why are they only there for 2 seconds? Try different things. I think one of the cool things is because these are constantly adapting things, try something. We did a bunch of A/B testing on sites because it's a way to go see which thing is going to work better. And A/B testing is, it could be as simple as we changed the language on this button. Does this or this get better responses? Do more people click it? So just keep evolving your sites, making sure that you're going back and cleaning out the old stuff, making sure that you're making new stuff, making sure that your homepage looks fresh and exciting. If you're going to have a blog, make sure you write a blog. If you're not writing a blog, get rid of it. I think that is a really hard thing. People write like 4 articles that they're really great, and then they just leave it on their website. But if you're not going to constantly make new articles, then what's the point for people to go there? And why leave that up there if it's now outdated? But that is it. That's all we got. That's the nitty-gritty of how to maintain your website. Build one, maintain it, make sure it's accessible, make sure it has all the content.
Amazing. So much content packed into this last hour and 20 minutes. We are going to give you all time to pick Hikari and Chris's brains more. Before we do that, Victoria, could you go ahead 2 slides, please? Sorry, one more. If everybody could quickly grab the link from the chat or use their phones to get the link from this QR code. This is the feedback form. Hopefully you have a little bit of time before you log off today to fill out this feedback form. I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to grab it. Great. And then can you go back to the slide before this, Victoria? In case anybody wants Hikari and Chris's information, their contact information. This is their emails and how to get in touch if you have further questions after today. We are so grateful that you were able to be here today with us, and we hope you found this informative. We do have additional trainings coming up in May. One is building off of what we did in the fall, focused on food systems and climate change, and we're going to have a panel with a bunch of folks who work in that space to go deeper into that topic. We're going to have one on how to build youth advisory boards. So if either of those sound interesting to you, check out our website and feel free to register. Both of those are on the website. And if you're interested in having us spotlight something for you, use the spotlight form on the screen right now, and we can certainly elevate events, your programs, other things that you want to spread to the CHTI community through our newsletters, through our LinkedIn. So feel free to send us things, and we would love to spotlight you. Okay, so with the last 10 minutes, how this is going to work is we're going to have 2 different breakout rooms. One that is going to focus a little bit more on content and content strategy. and then one that's going to focus a little bit more on accessibility, optimization, and some of the more technical stuff that Chris walked us through in the second half here. So you get to choose which breakout room you would like to go in. So Victoria is going to get that up on the screen shortly, and you all can, yeah, click, oh, perfect. And then from here, you're going to just head out. So please fill out that feedback form. If you do have a couple minutes, we'd appreciate it. But choose whichever room you'd like to go into for these last 10 minutes to ask questions and learn about what other people are doing with their websites. And we hope to see you at another CHTI training soon. That's all for me.